Halloween is just around the corner. So if you've got some pumpkin patch photos that you need to process, this is just the video for you. Hi, I'm Darlene with Digital Photo Mentor, and in this tutorial, you'll learn how to use Lightroom and Luminar to give your fall pumpkin photos a stylized look. So if you're ready, let's dig in. So I'm going to do the first part here in Lightroom. We're in Lightroom. So go to Develop Module. See this little sort of looks like a flash or a lightning bolt over here? If you see that, click it, because what it means is the image, when you imported it, there's now a newer raw processing version for Lightroom. And do you want to update the image to utilize that? So I'm going to say yes, right? You can review the changes and you can tell it not to show this ever again, this pop-up, but I can also update all of the images in the film strip. Okay, so recently I did an update to Lightroom and it'll just update them all. Okay, and I haven't edited them, so I'm not needing a before and after, right? As usual, I'm going to start with the camera profiles. And in this case, I'm looking for something. The idea that I had in my head when I saw this image was I kind of wanted it to look a bit more antique-y, more sort of a sepia tone with that orange really punching out. Okay, so that's kind of what I was looking for. Ooh, look at the orange there. That maybe is a little too far. There's something that's a little faded. And we can also look at the vintage ones, because these ones tend to have that kind of a look, right? Like that's totally different. Okay, these are similar to using a LUT, right? That's actually not too bad. So we could use this and go with something like this, and then just change the sky, right? That one gives it a different type of antique look. And when you dial these in, let's say I like this one, for example, you can actually increase it or dial it down a little bit. So you could say, well, I like this effect, but I'm just going to bring it down to like 75%, right? So if you bring it all the way back down, you end up at Adobe Color, right? So you can see what this is doing, and you can even go as far as 200, right? 200%, I don't know, amount, it's amount anyways, okay? So same here. This one kind of makes a matte look and you lose a lot of detail in the background, but it kind of looks spooky for Halloween, right? So this one I don't mind either, and it really brings out those pumpkins. So I might even do this one. Now you'll notice that when I do that, can you see the histogram? It's pushing the edges in. Right. So if I undo this one to 0, see how it's clipping? It's right on the edge, over here on the right. It's right on the edge, meaning there's some whites clipping, there's some highlights clipping, right, up here in the sky. I'm using my keyboard shortcut J to see that. Right? If I bring this LUT or this camera profile up, you can see that it's tucked in on both sides. What that means is there's now not going to be pure white or pure black. It's what's called a matte look. Okay, so you get this sort of faded out black looking type of thing. And even if I go in here and let's say, okay, I'm going to go to the tone curve, even if I increase the blacks, you see I never get to the edge of the graph. Okay, so if you like that kind of thing, great, do it. But if you apply the camera profile and then you realize, oh, I don't want that type of, cutting in on the edges, you can either just dial it back a bit or pick a different one. You'll notice that this one does the same thing. So a lot of these vintage ones do that same kind of effect, right? So if I don't want to lose that, I could go with one of these neutral ones like this and make that faded out look a different way, okay? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go with camera profile neutral, right? And I can bring the highlights down a little bit. You can see that there is a little bit of sky there. Right. But I'm actually going to leave it bright, because if I'm going to do a sky replacement, it's actually going to be easier for the program to find the sky if it's a little brighter. Okay. I just want to make sure that these leaves aren't faded out, right? Because you see how the highlights are, you've lost the leaves. So I'm going to bring that down so I've got the leaves like so, right? And now we've solve the clipping problem. Okay, so if I turn on clippings, there's detail in the sky. It should replace just fine. Okay, I'm going to do shift double click on the blacks and bringing up the exposure slider. Remember that is midtones. Okay, so that's going to brighten this part. Okay, and I definitely want more black. Okay, so I'm going to use my Alt Option key, make sure it's black in the middle, and then a little bit of clarity. I usually don't go very high with the clarity when I'm doing it here because I'm going to apply it more to the pumpkins locally. Okay. We can also play with the white balance. If we shift it to cloudy white balance, you'll notice that the whole thing becomes more yellow, right? If we shift it more the opposite way and we go to tungsten, you get blue, right? Daylight is kind of in the middle, right? But if we want it a little bit warmer, we can go more towards cloudy. And all those settings are doing is changing these two numbers here. So you can always just dial it in where you want. Okay. So I do want it to look kind of like fall. So I like it a little bit warmer, maybe less magenta color, something like that. Okay. And now once I've done that, I'm going to make sure that where are we here? The lens corrections are done. So under profile, you can enable the lens profile and also chromatic aberration. So where chromatic aberration will show up, if you have any, is along the edges of things. And I actually don't see any here. So it looks like it's pretty decent, right? This is what kind of a lens? 16 to 50. Okay, so that's a really good lens. Okay, I think that's a Sony lens. So high quality lens, you won't get as much of that type of chromatic aberration. So that looks good. I'm going to use a preset to apply a vignette. And all that does is adjust the settings here in the post crop vignette. So you can see turn it off and on. You can see what that's doing. Okay. Now I want to really punch out these pumpkins. Okay. So I'm going to use a mask and I'm going to do select subject and hopefully it picks up the pumpkins. Okay. Now the problem is it's also picked up a good chunk of the barn, which I don't want. So I'm going to have to either subtract all of the barn or I could just try again and do select object, which I think I'm going to do. So I'm going to undo and instead I'm going to choose object. When you're doing choose object, you have two choices. You can either draw an X or paint over the thing you want to select. I'm going to try an X first. Okay, now you don't have to be perfect. You just have to say, look, the thing I want to select is within this box. Okay, now look at, we're much closer. Okay, all I need to do is get rid of a little bits over here. So I'm just going to do subtract, use a brush, and just paint it away. Right, so I'm erasing. Okay, so I chose subtract. And I'm just getting rid of the bits that it selected outside of the wheelbarrow, right? And I lowered you notice that I lowered the feather, right? Because I want to be able to get close to the edge without it fading into the wheelbarrow. Okay, so now I've got that selected. My selection is good. I can just either call it subject or wheelbarrow pumpkins. And what do I want to do? Okay, I want to add some texture. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see what's happening. I'm going to add some clarity. And I'm going to add some black. Okay, maybe even highlights down a little bit. See the tops of the pumpkins a little bit bright. So just darken them a little bit. Let's see what that's doing. Okay, so see the texture coming out on the tops of those guys? Okay. Now that I'm happy with that, we can do an inverse mask. Okay, click on the three dots, duplicate and invert. So now we have everything opposite, right? And in this case, I'm going to bring the texture down a little bit and just darken everything. Okay. Even by bringing the black down, okay, you'd think that exposure, but black's going to give me more of that rich dark color in the background. Okay, so I'm going to go more with the black than I do with the exposure. Okay, so let's see what that's doing. Okay. If I look at how the masks are doing overall, see how it's bringing the pumpkins out? like so. And what I might do is do a second one where I just want to darken the bottom here, okay? But I don't want to get the wheelbarrow. So what I might do is I'm going to do a linear gradient. And I'm going to come up from the bottom. Oh, my dots aren't showing. There we go. If your dots aren't showing, just click H on your keyboard. That's what I just did. Okay. Just means hide and show. Okay, so see how I can darken the grass a little bit down here in the bottom. But I don't want to darken the wheelbarrow, so I can subtract. And once again, I'll just do subtract object, and it'll get the wheelbarrow. Okay, so now if I hit O on my keyboard, you can see that it's got the grass and not the pumpkin and the wheelbarrow. Okay. So I can take it up as high as I want, and it will not apply to the wheelbarrow. Something like that. Okay, so far, this is what I've done. And now I want to deal with that sky. Okay. I think I cropped the other one a little bit. Let me just go have a look. I cropped it to fit into the video aspect ratio to make the featured image. But what I might do in terms of cropping for this one is a little bit off of the right-hand side, because you always want to have more space in front of the subject if it's looking a particular way. And I'm going to come back to any questions you guys have here. And the wheelbarrow is kind of facing that way, right? If you were going to wheel it, it's going to go this way. So if anything, I'm going to take a little bit of space off this side, and I might come in a little bit off the top. I really want to see that top part of that roof. And since we don't have it, the new stuff, the generative AI, we could totally do that in Photoshop, or the new Luminar will have it. Right now, we don't have that in Lightroom at all. Or I can just come down a little bit so that it's a little bit more obvious that I'm cropping into it. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Okay, now the wheelbarrow is a little more prominent. Okay, now because I'm only going to do a sky replacement here, I'm not going to take this to Photoshop or do the whole smart object thing. I'm just going to go straight into Luminar Neo. So I'm going to right click it, edit in Luminar Neo. And I just installed the new version, okay? So fingers crossed, nothing goes wrong. I haven't tested anything yet. Okay, so now I'm in the plugin version, okay? And you know that it's the plugin version because it says apply here. And I don't have the, you see that I don't have the other stuff like the catalog. So you don't see the HDR and the focus stacking and all that stuff, okay? So if you need to do HDR focus stacking, you open your images into Luminar differently, okay? You can use those extensions, but you just open them differently. Okay, so my first thing was I wanted to do the sky replacement and then maybe apply a light, right? But while I'm here, let's just see what they are suggesting or what Luminar is suggesting in terms of a preset, because maybe there's something here that will do the trick, right? So as I hover over, is there one that grabs me? Ooh, that's kind of spooky, right? And keep in mind that if you apply one, right, this one, for example, you can undo it, or you can also scale it back. So you can say, well, I like it, but, you know, not quite that much. Unfortunately, we can't stack presets because one overwrites another at this point, but you can dial them back if you don't like the full effect. That one's kind of neat, right? It gives you almost like a faded sepia tone, which is kind of what I was going for, but I want a little bit more of the orange, right? So I kind of like this faded grasslands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply it, and before I dial it back, I'm actually just going to see what it's doing. So when you apply a preset, you can go into here and see what it's doing and then decide to dial it back. So for example, right, this one somewhere is dialing back the color, right? So that's interesting. Something got changed there. Let me undo. Something got changed there. I don't know why it's shifted that to pink. Ah, there we go. Okay, so it shifted these colors here, which is bizarre. And then this mood was applied afterwards. So that's interesting. So tricky to dial that one back, right? If it was using the color tool to desaturate, then it would be easier to do that. Okay. Interesting way of applying things. Let's see if there's another one that might apply. So it thinks urban style because of the building, like it analyzes, right, what's in your image. Toronto, interesting. Okay, New York is actually kind of cool, and it's giving me that matte look again that I like. So I might go with this one. Let's go with something like that. See how that's, I like that. Give me a little bit of punch as well. So I've dialed that one back to about 70. Okay. And if I want to see what it's doing, right, I could see that it's doing some face, which obviously I don't need because there's no faces in this picture, right? It's done some develop, it's doing some enhance, it's done some color adjustments. You can learn a lot about the program just by opening up the edits when you've done a preset and see, okay, what is it doing exactly? Okay, it's done some color harmony. Look at that, it's really working nicely on the oranges for sure. Okay, it's punched up the details. So I really like what this is doing. And as a matter of fact, I might take it farther, right? So we could really punch up the details a bit more and then just mask it onto the subject. I'm just going to use a radial gradient. And it doesn't even have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be exactly on the wheelbarrow. Maybe a little bit less fade, like so. There we go. Something like that. Okay. So I'm getting I want it opposite. I want it on the wheelbarrow. But you'll notice under the masking, like there isn't a select subject, right? If I do mask AI, it doesn't come up with subject. That's not one of the options. Okay? So see how that's just selecting the pumpkins? So I like that. Now, if I like that mask and position, I can copy it. Okay. Let's see, it jumped around to super contrast. So it's done some, it's not doing all that much. High key, doesn't look like that one was applied, but sometimes they will set it to 0 in a preset. And then all you have to do is dial it up. See that? So it sets some objects, it sets some settings here for you, and we can just dial it up a little bit. Okay, now we've got this mood or a LUT. I can decide to apply it more if I want. And finally, it has applied some toning. Okay, so the toning is giving us, looks like sort of a yellow to the highlights and a blue to the shadows, which is interesting. Okay, so let's see what that's doing. It's very subtle, right? I could actually take it farther and give it more saturation. Now you could see it really coming to life. If I want, you see how it's got blue in the shadows? So I don't actually want the blue. I'm just going to dial it down. I like the yellow. Keep it warm. Keep everything warm and antique kind of looking. Okay. And then all I have to do is my sky. But I might come and do another vignette here as well, because the vignette that you can do, I'll do that after I do the sky. The vignette you can do in Luminar, you can position it. Okay. So you can't do that in Lightroom. You would have to do a radial gradient. Okay. Okay. So now sky replacement. So the sky, I remember I wanted something fairly orange. I don't remember which sky I chose. Let me see if there's one in my sky pack. I wanted something fairly orangey. I'm just going to apply one and then see when it pops in here if it's orange enough. We can also make it more orange. Is it applying yet? No, it should come into here. Okay, so we're seeing some color there. We can move it around a little bit. Not so much orange. Let me try this one. Okay, now we can do some things like warm it up, brighten it, I don't want it to be quite so dark. And then I can also position it, right? So I can move it around. I'll move it down a little bit because it's kind of not getting that bottom corner right here. Oh, and doing so, we got more color. See that? So now I can sort of play with positioning and get something that gives a little bit of a little something something. Okay, I might defocus it one or so. And the other sky that I chose was a lot more orange. Right? We can look at that as well. I think I chose one from one of Matt's packs. I've got a lot of different sunsets that I've gotten with, for example, if you have an X membership with Skylum, that one's got some orange. I want something that's really, really orange. We can make it more orange. Dramatic. Please, whatever you do, don't use this one. It's under dramatic sunset. It's the most used sunset ever, and it's just so recognizable as such. So just don't use it. Stormy skies. I've got all kinds of stuff. Stunning skies. Oh, here's some orange. We should be able to get some orange here. There we go. Okay, so I'm looking to try and complement the sky. Okay, and I'll work on the mask refinement a little bit as well. So I'm going to brighten it. And let's see about the positioning of this one. We can flip it around and see if it's any better this way. This might be the one I used, actually. So be careful of sun placement. If you've got the sun in the sky, you would see shadows, right? So be careful of sun placement, that you don't put it in a sky that is not applicable. Kind of like that, actually. Yeah, let's do something like that. Right, now I want to look at the mask, and I'm going to do some relight as well. So relight helps to blend the sky. So if you use the relight strength, it takes the color from the sky and puts it into the image, okay? Like so. But let me work on this blending here, because you can see that it's not quite perfect. So you need to work on these sliders here, the mask refinement. The one that I find that works the best is fixed details. Right, let me just do that and see if it picks up more of the trees. Right, but it's doing a pretty good job getting in there. Right, right, it's doing a good job around that tree. So what I'm looking for is, are there any little gaps? Are there any little, white outlines or anything that it's missing? Right, so I can do close gaps as well. So let's just check over here again. And like I said, keep in mind that the mask scene relighting helps, right? So when I increase relight, see how it affects everything, right? And if there's a human, it brightens the human as well, okay? Global, you have to be careful of, because when you bring global up, see how it's picking up in here now? Global means it goes over the whole image more, okay? So be really careful with that one. Okay. This one actually looks pretty good the way it is. Let me see what it looks like. Ooh, look at that. Okay, so there's our sky. Now I did blur it. Okay, so if I want to not blur it, I can take that off. And there we go. Okay, now I'm going to do the vignette as the final step. And I might do a mystical, my usual. Okay, so I'm going to come in tighter on a vignette. And I want to put it right around the wheelbarrow. So move the position so it's like so. That's why I bring the feather down to 0. And then once I do that, we can adjust the amount. Okay, and a final mystical. Right. Let's see how close I came. I'm going to save this one and bring it back to Lightroom. And let's take a look at the one that I did in Luminar previously. So I used a different sky, obviously. It looks a little bit different. Okay, different variation. Looks like I went more antique this time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy my teaching style and you want more step-by-step instructions to learn the software, check out Luminar Neo, the complete course. You'll find a link to it in the pinned comment below. Click either of the videos on the screen now to watch more photo editing tutorials using Luminar Neo, Lightroom, and Photoshop.